Hey everybody, welcome to 3D6 Charge, a podcast about competitive Warhammer 40k, the state of the game and community news. We're streaming live on Twitch at twitch.tv/3d6charge. We're live every Wednesday at 7:30 p.m. Eastern. We're also anywhere that you can find podcasts such as Spotify or iTunes. This is episode 32, What We Want in 40k. I'm your host, Chris Vo, and joining me tonight are Kevin Lieb. Kevin, say hi. Kevin, you're muted.
We've lost him.
Howdy. Okay,
howdy.
There
we go. And Benjamin Rubenstein.
Hi, my mic works.
So, what's going on, guys? What's new? I don't think we had an episode last week for reasons. I don't know why. I think I just didn't want to do it, but
you were tiling your bathroom, if I remember correctly.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, I needed to retile. I need to go buy tile because I had tile guys coming the next day, and we didn't actually have the fucking tile. So I had to drive all over the place to find just the right shade of black for tile.
Buy tile, 40k podcasts. Buy tile, 40k podcasts. Buying tile. I see where your priorities lie.
Yeah. Sad days.
Yeah. Well, good news is I bought the fucking tile, and they're.
Oh, hey! So he can't use that excuse anymore.
No, actually, it hasn't even been installed yet. They're coming tomorrow to install it. So.
So yeah. That being said, I've been playing some more TTS, which is like pretty fun. But that's what I've been doing for 40k. Starting to build up the sisters list. I've been playing in TTS in real life for the eventuality of, tournaments happening again. As far as real life goes, not much has really changed for me. Pretty much the same. How about you guys?
My past week, I was on call for my work, and we had a very busy off-call schedule, so I was very busy with that. Also, I've discovered I love Call of Duty Warzone, and I might be slightly addicted to that right now.
Warzone's fun, man. I had a friend of mine staying with me for like 4 weeks this past summer, and like, not to get into it, but like he was trying to like find like his single self again. So he went to Micro Center and dropped like $2,000 on a new gaming computer. So yeah, we ended up just playing like a lot of Warzone to take his mind off of things. But
yeah, Kevin's dragged me into that too. So I am not a proficient Call of Duty player, but it's good fun even if you're bad. So that's something. But yeah, shall we get into our topic?
Yeah. So you guys actually brought this topic up. It was like, what do we want in 40k? Not just what we want in 40k, but like, what are some things from other games that maybe GW can take inspiration from and use it to, nudge the rules in a certain direction. That's not to say like we should just scrap everything and then just adopt like the Infinity rule set, because then it's just, well, just go play Infinity instead, and we don't have to spend all of our money on tiny models and making terrain. We can just use like yoga blocks as terrain, and it's perfectly like thematic. But like here's a great example of the kind of thing I'm talking about. Age of Sigmar. We've seen a whole bunch of shit in Age of Sigmar that like was wild when Sigmar, first introduced it, but then as chapter approves have come out, as new editions have come out, we've seen it like get ported over, maybe not like completely, untouched, but adapted a little bit to work better for 40k, almost like they're using like Age of Sigmar as like their bizarro wacky 40k, which it is, but using it as like a rules test bed of sorts, but along those same lines, like, do you guys have any ideas of what could be brought into 40K to maybe tighten it up rules wise or make it more fun and engaging. And let's keep in mind, like, we don't want this to be like just being one, a wholesale rules rewrite and let's just go play Infinity, or two, we don't want it to also just be like wish listy, you know, like here's another example, something I would consider like wish listy. Like, in no world is GW going to move away from D6 dice, from 6-sided dice, because the quantity of dice you need to roll in this game is silly at times. And if you start telling people that, hey, you need to be rolling like D8s, D10s, D12s for a full squad of orc shooter boys, you know, people are gonna kind of tell you to go fuck yourself.
Yeah, larger dice brings more variance to the game too, which I know it's a dice game, like there is variance, but I don't think I don't think either of us want to see variance increased. They brought D12s in for Apocalypse, but in a lot of ways, D12s actually were decreasing variance because they brought D12s in when the target numbers were generally speaking lower, which actually meant that when you're rolling a D12 looking for like a 4-up, you were very likely to make it. Which is sort of an interesting mechanic. It gives you a little bit more granularity, but in the end, I think staying on D6s is like clearly where we should be. I think we should start with like our really like way out there ideas and sort of move into things that like might actually sort of come into the game. So I think where I would like to start is sort of an idea that would require pretty much a grounds up rules rewrite, but you see it every time the game gets discussed from like a games rule level, like, is there a problem with 40K quote unquote level, which is the idea of getting rid of the whole I go, you go, like going by squad based activations, which I've seen this conversation come up over and over. And I've played squad based activation games, like Legion is a great example of a game where like it's not like my army goes and your army goes. It's like, all right, like this stormtrooper moves and shoots. All right, your turn. And it really changes how the game plays when things are. It has its own level of tactical flexibility that it's very, very interesting, but we would definitely need to do some rewrites. There's too many units in 40K to be doing that, so it would probably have to be like detachment based, and then you have to rewrite detachments because right now most armies are like 1 or 2, and like you'd probably want like 5 or 6 to be interesting.
Well, that kind of makes it play like Apocalypse then, right?
Yeah, exactly. Except Apocalypse is horribly balanced for competitive play. They didn't even try, which is fine. It's a big silly game. Put your big models on the table, shoot at each other. But we're talking about like competitive 40K.
Right. This also kind of comes up with like Kill Team. If you think about Kill Team is that like one unit goes, next unit goes. We all have a shared. Actually, they didn't do a shared movement phase there. It was still I go, you go for movement. But in regards to actually shooting, yeah, they switched off in between. It definitely changes up like who shoots first. You have to think about like what unit do I need to shoot with first so they can get rid of their threat and vice versa. It's a very different game.
Yeah.
But we would probably be I would imagine armies would be like what 700 points of like we'd probably be playing like 700 point armies in order to make this like scale work.
Yeah, so I actually prefer the Legion model more than the Kill Team model. The Kill Team model to me oftentimes feels like, all right, we each have our own movements. So like you move, I move. All right, now we go to shooting. And it oftentimes boils down to I want to shoot my biggest gun at your biggest gun as early in the shooting phase as possible because like that's the guy who's most likely to kill someone. And if he kills someone before they get to shoot, well, that shooting's just gone. And also like that's the dude that you're going to be shooting at. Legion, because it's you pick a unit, the unit activates. Legion, it's not just like there's more actions than like moving and shooting. You get 2 actions, but like most often it's move and shoot. Sometimes it's like move and attack and melee. But what makes Legion really interesting is like if I activate a unit, I have a lot of really fascinating decisions to make with it. If I'm moving and shooting it, I'm probably moving it at you to get better ranges for the guns. But if I'm doing that, then I'm opening it up to get shot back at from a safer distance. And then if you can start shooting at it from safer distance, I'm locking myself into moving all of my guys up to shoot at you, and now I'm opening my whole army up to getting shot at from like you can use your actions to aim, or in 40k, you can just like stay in your cover and shoot at my guys who are moving up without like getting them into threat range. And it also makes a very interesting play with out activating your opponent. There's a lot to be said for like if you have more units than your opponent. If you're unit of like eradicators just like behind a building, and you have 2 more activations than your opponent, well, those eradicators are going last because this turn they can go literally last, walk out from behind the building, completely murk something because they're eradicators, and then on your next turn you're gonna make them go first and potentially just like walk them back behind the building, and now they're safe. You're only going to shoot with them every other turn, but like shooting with them every other turn for the entire game is better than shooting with them once or twice and then just having them die.
Well, even in that situation, it's not every other turn, right? You're actually are shooting every turn. You're going first.
Assuming that we keep the action of like move shoot, right?
Well, then you can shoot move and then move shoot. Then
that's what I mean is keeping the 40k like paradigm of like the unit moves and then the unit shoots.
Gotcha.
Which is the next thing I want to talk about, Kevin. Thanks for ruining my point, but we can bring.
Hey,
we can go back to that later.
It was a great segue.
No, it was good. That being said, I think that the game you need to rewrite like how detachments work, which makes it sort of this is why I want to talk about this first. I think it's interesting. I greatly enjoy the way Legion plays, but I think that you'd have to change too much for it to be really a practical change.
Right. Something that I could see coming from Legion, but still would kind of be out there. In Legion, when you go to activate, you determine priority based on this card you pick from your starting hand, and the hand's based on who your leaders are in the battle. And there are certain priorities to them. So, like, you have something that like lets you activate a bunch of units, but you're going to go last. Your opponent's going to get to activate one of their units first. But these cards also have some like big effect associated with them. I could see them. I think it's already too late for 9th edition, but like in 10th edition, like having certain people being your general and they get like a kind of like a in some way shape with priority based on like you kind of do like a priority bit based on like what kind of like bonuses you want your army to get. So you could be like, I'm going to be really low priority but get this really big bonus, or vice versa.
Like for going first, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, like almost like a bid for going first. You're bidding like what? Then there's been some talks about that too, which we can talk about that as our next change. The other thing that are we good with this change? Anything else we want to talk about in this before I pull up another thing I want to talk about?
Honestly, like the only mini game I play is 40k.
Okay.
So I can't say shit about like the rule set of Legion or Infinity or even like X-Wing. And but I only have like the most like superficial knowledge of the rule set of Sigmar.
Right.
Gotcha.
And then like I can see where GW's been like dipping their toe in the water with things like Kill Team and Apocalypse, where they brought in the D12 dice in Apocalypse. They brought in like another thing where like there's a damage phase at the end of the turn to kind of take like a baby step away from I go you go. And then Kill Team is just I activate, you activate, and within the phase. So I can see like where they're at least getting away from the giant monolith that is I go you go gameplay, which has been like their staple since I don't know, how old am I? 30 years.
Yeah, that's where Ben was very reasonable in saying like this probably isn't coming to 40k. I think it's too.
So the next thing I kind of want to talk about that again would kind of require ground up re-rate because it's more of a design philosophy than a specific game mechanic. And yeah, chat's pointing out this has become a stealth FFG stream. There are some things in Legion that I really like, and I want to talk a little bit about the character design, like the way like characters function in Legion. Not just like how they take over your army and give like leadership buffs out, which are like a lot more important in Legion. Like that's the way like character like auras and stuff work is like fine for 40k, but the way like the actual characters work feels like they've kind of missed the mark with how characters should feel. Like for like a lot of times, like for melee purposes and like melee heroes, where oftentimes like melee characters are just they tone it down now that like we're losing like some of the space marines like giving themselves the ability to reroll stuff, but a lot of melee characters are just hilariously killy, and we end up just sort of measuring their worth not based on their killiness but on how far they can move and still make a charge. And Legion answered this problem by looking at like Darth Vader is the model that comes to my mind, and just saying, well, what if he just like is actually able of killing literally anything he touches, but his movement speed is 2 inches, and like that's it. Like he just inches across the table, and he's just a complete monster. And that's I almost wish they did that a little bit more with some of the characters, where it just feels like some of the character designs are just over the top, and they are bringing it down in 9th edition, which is good. But some of our things like our Primarchs and stuff, I wish were a little bit more designed like they are in Legion. And the other thing is, like, I think that GW sort of has this design philosophy where they are unwilling to make small models very powerful or very expensive, which is fair. Like that is a reasonable place to want to be. But then they, at the same time, want them to live up in some ways to the lore, and you just like can't have a 200-point character live up to like the nonsense that they have going on in the lore. And FFG just looked at Darth Vader, and they basically, if he was a 40k model, he costs 500 points, and he's an inch tall. He's like walking next to tanks that cost a quarter of what he does. And so I think it would be interesting if GW opened up a little bit on just like making characters heinously expensive, like some of the really silly named ones that they like are trying to push, like Tigerius and stuff like that.
Yeah, that would definitely be interesting. I mean, like, trying to balance stuff around the lore is, I feel like that's always just going to be, it's always going to lead to a feel bad situation, because yes, everybody wants their models, especially like their Primarchs, to be super powerful like they are in the books. The problem is, if you have a model that's super powerful like that, the reason it feels super powerful is because it's absolutely decimating your opponent's army, and if you're on the receiving end of that, that feels really bad, and I'm speaking at this from like a perspective of back in like from 3rd to I think it was like the end of 7th edition. The timeline was stuck at the 13th Black Crusade and Cadia being still existing, and nobody had ever seen like a Primarch, and GW was never going to bring forth a Primarch model because they'd be heinously overpowered because of how ridiculous they are in the books. And then figure out my fucking surprise when I come back in 8th edition, and you can just buy Mortarion and Magnus and Gilliman, and and there's rumors about the Lion and like all of this craziness, and then they're absolute monsters on the table. But when you have an absolute monster like that on the table, one of two things is going to happen. One, you are going to like just completely wreck somebody else's army, and they're going to be like, well, it's I go, you go, and I didn't really have a chance to do anything against that. Or two, they went first in I go, you go, and your 500 points, $200 model is back in the foam.
Yeah.
So
that's
actually,
okay.
This actually goes into a topic I was going to think.
Can I make one more point on character design before we jump this, though?
Oh, this is on character design.
Oh, okay.
So in HeroClix, you have certain characters who have like a different cost you can fill them at, and they'll get like additional health and additional abilities if you pay them at the additional higher cost. And one thing GW could do with some of these characters is be like, I don't know how exactly they would phrase it, but they could be like
heroic
lore Tigerius and tabletop Tigerius, and like
it could be like heroic Tigerius or Tigerius.
Right, and like heroic Tigerius is like 400 points and is like almost as good a psyker as Magnus.
Yeah,
is now on the table.
Okay, I'm into that. I like that idea.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, I like that. I like that idea a lot. It would one, let you use those models, and two, scale it to the power level that you actually want to play them at. And then it adds a little bit of granularity for like TOs who want to say, all right, you can bring like your Lords of War or your Demon Primarchs or whatever, but they got to be at like heroic level or below. You can't be bringing like mythic Mortarion to play.
Yeah, I'm actually like I like that too. That also opens up a lot of granularity for tournament structure without punishing people for owning models.
Yeah, because the last thing I want to do is for GW to punish people for buying their models, because they sell models. They're a model selling business, and also people take a lot of pride in their models. And like I've been painting Mortarion for like 2 years now. Granted, most of that is spent just looking at Mortarion, but still, like when I finally get him painted, and I want to be able to put him on the table and use him during a game, and not just have him like in my display case.
Yeah, like I'm actually super into that. Just being like, yeah, there is a version of Mortarion that is like 300 points, and he's not T8 with 16 wounds. He's like T7 with 10. Like has a 4 mortal save, and you know what? It's fine. He's still good. It's not insane. Yeah, Kevin, I love that suggestion. Actually, GW, you should do this. The other thing that I really like about Legion character design is so we have the monsters like the Emperor and Darth Vader who are just doing nonsense. And actually the Emperor kind of falls into the second category, where like I said, Legion has this like double action. Like the whole game is based around when you go with the unit, it gets 2 actions. And a lot of your like not like all right, I own the battlefield characters like characters who are like buffing people like General Veers, Princess Leia, like your quote unquote commander types. They have like usually some action on their card that's like a unique action that only they can do. That is basically highly incentivizing them to not be like actually engaging in combat. Like Veers very rarely is like shooting people. He's usually moving and shouting at some stormtroopers to shoot better. They need the help. They need every piece of motivation they can get. They're stormtroopers. But
so
jokes
what
aside,
you're saying is an actual captain, not a
like
captain
an actual
who's
captain.
also an absolute fucking monster.
Yeah, like I'm sorry, your guy with the teeth of terror, he can tell his people how to aim, or he can go flying at the speed of sound in the enemy team with his giant chainsword and kill 20 people. How is he doing both? I don't understand. And like when we're playing Legion with like something like Veers or Leia, where they're just like, no, like they're not shooting and also somehow making everyone around them better. Like he's just cowering behind a rock because he's an Imperial scum and just like telling people what to do. And that's what like a captain or a lieutenant like feels like to me. Like, yes, captains are excellent at combat. If they get into combat, they will do great. But
so, thinking about modern or the current design, like imagine if Chapter Master was you pick a unit and they get a Chapter Master aura, but he doesn't have the Captain aura. You're just like he can either actually make himself good or can make a unit good, but he's not like actually affecting everything.
yeah, or like it's an action, or like it's like a literal action because there are actions in 40k that completes at the end of the turn. So like, yeah, you can do the Chapter Master thing, but you're not shooting, fighting, charging. Like you're giving them an order.
I mean, we're already like halfway there. We've got the action system, and we've got Chapter Master auras being like a targeted like, hey, I'm the Chapter Master. You guys listen to me and shoot this thing real good.
Yep. And that also opens up things to be like that, and that can be another way that like Gilman's a little bit more interesting than a normal Chapter Master. Like maybe you just like let him do both. Like he's a Primarch, he can have his cake and eat it too. But like a normal Chapter Master, they have to shout.
Rob in the chat
I'm ready
has
for
an interesting
Gilliman
point. He thinks that the kill team turn model is an easy port to 40k, and I agree. The first 2 turns would be longer, but I think overall game length stays the same. Now, that I wonder if this has already been play tested and done. Like I'm sure like one person somewhere has done this, but I haven't seen anything like an actual like write up on it or like a bat rep or anything. But I'd be interested to see if like what the results of that would be.
So there were some rumors that the Apocalypse rule set we had were a version of the 8th edition rule set we were going to get. Obviously, they would have spent a little bit more time balancing the
Yeah.
But I, if you could like actually look at Apocalypse for like a balanced perspective, like what you're trying to do in that game, I could see that just happening, and you kind of use that as your baseline, Chris.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that there's too many, like I said, there's too many units. Like, things would just get lost. You're like, all right, this is my 8th guardsman squad. Like, how I activate this one, and then you look at your opponent awkwardly, and you both kind of sit there going, because it's been 2 hours from this like one turn. So I do think it would need to be like some sort of grouping system, not just like one unit. But I feel like games would be longer. I feel like you just have to scale down the points again. And at some point, like, this is a war game. We want to be playing armies, not like skirmish forces.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, that's another point of this too. Little like nuance of this. This is a war game. You know, you want more control and nuance over your units, and to allow the same for your opponent. But at some point, like, there's like an abstraction that you have to make because this is a game, and otherwise we're gonna be doing like literal calculus over the course of like a month just to play one game. You know, it's like like at one side of the spectrum, there's a game like Fortnite, right? And then all the way at the other end of the spectrum is a game like Arma 3, where there's literally no jump button, and you know, like, you have to aim everything with iron sights, and you know, like, somewhere in between is like our perfect 40k. And I'd say right now it's probably like closer to Fortnite than Arma, but I think what we're looking for is a slight nudge closer to the middle towards a more nuanced way of going about the game. Would you guys agree with that?
So I know I did say I bought Call of Duty recently. I should probably note that this is the first Call of Duty game I have ever owned or played, and therefore I didn't understand any of your references.
All right. So one's a literal cartoon, and at the other end is a documentary.
Fortnite I know because I'm a school teacher.
In media res.
Okay, cool. I'm gonna let Kevin take this one.
Yeah. So the thing is, like, I don't want granularity to slow down the game. I want something where you don't feel like you're just like your models are stuck in time while your opponent just like destroys half of them. Like, what's happening? Why did that guard squad get killed without having any opportunity to do anything? Why did that 10-man tactical marine squad, these like people who are supposed to be like hard to take down, just disappear and never do anything? Like, how did that happen? Maybe it happened because your opponent's entire army focused them down, and like, then we can represent that by like literally his first 4 activations are like in this I go you go are on that tac squad, so they never got to go because like it was an ambush, and your opponent paid a cost for that ambush. Yeah.
No, I like some aspect of that. Like if you have like a unit of like Blightlord Terminators that you know are just like just built like a brick shithouse of a unit, and they're going to be very hard to budge, and there's a certain level of satisfaction that you as a player would get from your opponent's entire shooting phase going towards that one unit, and then it's still like being there, or like, you know, having taken like 90% of its shooting. And I feel like that would feel different. It would definitely feel different if it was a I go you go shooting, you know, where I shoot something and then you shoot at my Terminators, or I don't know. There's a lot better way of saying it, and I'm doing a shit job at it. But I think you guys can kind of tell what I'm trying to get at here.
Yeah. So chat's saying, and keeping on theme of pulling from other games, pulling from BattleTech and also kind of Apocalypse, just having everyone shoots and then you resolve all the damage, or like everyone shoots simultaneously. So kind of just like give everyone the noise ring rule. I think it's probably the more elegant way, right? Like every time a model dies, it gets to shoot if it hasn't shot. If it's like it hasn't shot yet, or this another shoot. If it would get another shooting phase, it gets to shoot then. Something like that.
Yeah.
Which is
Should be an interesting mechanic, like just everyone's under an ancient banner, like when you go to pull them.
yeah, like if that like something like if the unit would get to shoot in the next shooting phase or hasn't shot in the current shooting phase, it gets to shoot. That way, so like the top, which means like the top, on the last turn of the game, whoever's on the top of the turn doesn't get that rule because they've gotten all their shooting phases. It's not like they're losing shooting phases when their models are dying now. And same thing, like if I shoot your guy and then you shoot back at the guy who shot, like that guy doesn't get to shoot again when he dies because like he's already shot the shooting phase. He's not like if he died next turn, like he wouldn't be getting a shooting phase anyway. So that's kind of interesting. I do think that might make it really tricky to like get anywhere in the game because at that point you just like want to just take the most hammery shooting units possible because like even if they die, they can just like turn around and murder them, kill them, and you're just going to trade one for one the entire game. And that's like a little concerning to me. Like I don't know, like I worry that game just like turns into like that's just like literal like who's like out efficiencying their opponent because if everything just gets to shoot back, then there's no like getting the jump on someone or like ambushing units or anything like that. It's just like, all right, I shoot, you shoot. Who did better?
Yeah.
The thing I want to bring up, also from a Fantasy Flight game, because I play a bunch of them because they're great. We're not sponsored, but man, they should really sponsor us. Is in Armada. It's not a go activation, but even if it wasn't, the very interesting thing with Armada is that the turn is in a different order. So when you pick a unit, it does what is functionally the command phase. Thank you for that, Kevin. It does what is functionally the command phase, and then it shoots, and then it moves, and that makes a really fascinating set of decisions. In Armada, it's because you're playing ships and their engines are on the back, you have to move at your opponent, which can be awkward because then you move into their range and then they get to shoot you and then sometimes fly past you and it's a disaster. But for 40k, it makes a really interesting decision where like, all right, you go. If you hit your units, we're not shooting at anything because your shooting phase is happening inside of a building, and then you move them. And now you can move them, and if I like you put them out in the middle of the open, you can literally know what will hit them. It's whatever can see them from where they're currently standing. And that makes an interesting set of decisions. If you move them out onto objectives, then next turn, like they'll get to shoot first at stuff that comes out to get them, unless your opponent left stuff out, in which case you might just like moving them into the line of fire. This would require some changes. Like you'd have to rethink how charges work too, because I think with this it would be too easy to go right from no one can shoot each other to all right, everyone's in melee combat. And melee proficient armies are already a little favored in 9th edition. Or rather, you need to be proficient at melee to compete in 9th edition. You can get away with being a shooting army, but you need to be able to punch things out of melee. But it creates very interesting tactical decisions, I think, to make units shoot before they move. Like you could even keep it I go, you go. It just really changes up like the way damage works, like when damage happens and how all works. What do you guys think? Oh, I see.
I don't know. I just don't have the experience with other rule sets. Like on paper, it sounds good. I don't know how I don't know how it'd be in practice.
So, I could see that being a fun alternative game mode. I think if you were to play that alternative game mode for like 3 years, you'd be like, let's try the opposite.
Fair enough.
These aren't the when I initially brought up this topic. These are interesting. These would like they'd make the game feel different and make the game feel unique. Like there would be some novelty to it again, but weren't exactly what I was thinking about when I like presented this topic. Like,
okay, what do you want to talk about?
I'll give you one.
Dominating it.
In Legion, squad movement. So in Legion, when you go to move a unit, you move the leader, his number of inches, and then you just place the squad near incoherency.
Oh,
That's
yeah.
it. You're done.
Yeah, we've been talking about how all these things make the game go long. Yeah, Legion movement is like you move 100 models and it takes like 30 seconds because you
sounds
move the guy
so much
and you
fucking easier.
Yeah,
But
you're like,
I
all
think
right,
you
my
also
sergeant
would
moves.
need to cap unit sizes, or at least
Yeah,
like
all
have
right, my
some
sergeant
sort
moves.
of. There's got to be a tighter unit cohesion rule than just like imagine that, but with 8th edition unit cohesion rules. You are capping every objective on the table every time.
Right. The way I would do it is like your unit. If you're a 5-man squad, your units have to be within 2 inches. If you're up to 10 men, it can be 3 inches. Up to 15 men, it can be 4 inches. Like something like that.
The problem is there are 30-man squads.
Well,
but you
okay,
can
keep increasing the number.
Oh, that's fair. Yeah. The other thing, there's a lot of measurement. If I remember correctly, it's been a second since I played Legion. There's a lot of measurement that only happens from the squad leader. And I believe capturing objectives is one of those things. So it's not like, oh, you can just like kind of spread out and get onto objectives. It's like, no. Like the squad leader whose position is tracked and like you can't just kind of shuffle around. Like he needs to be sitting on the objective. And then that solves your issue of like this squad can kind of just spread out and send an objective surprise.
It does, but it still doesn't solve the movement blocking like potential issues that I foresee with that.
I don't know that that's a huge problem because you're still like limited from where your squad leader is, and like a blob of 30 dudes could movement block like without that rule like pretty efficiently.
I actually think that if we were saying like a block of 30 has to be within like 6 or 8 inches or whatever number makes sense, that like 18-inch, let's say 16 inches, like this much. But let's be honest, 30 dudes can be like covering like an area like this big.
Yeah, 30 dudes can cover like a quarter of the if you spread them out at their maximum distance from each other. Like the 9th edition cohesion rules are stricter, but like 30 dudes is a lot of dudes when there's 2 inches in between. You can just spread out.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I actually love that change. It's one of the things that
at surface level I do like it. And I
40K.
think in the details there needs to be a little bit of tweaking to make it work in 40K. But in terms of it makes horde armies way more tenable to play. Because like if you were playing on a chess clock and you decided to bring like, you know, Tyranid moving carpet or like a bunch of orc boys or a bunch of like guard squads, you're not like talking with your opponent like at all, other than like just saying like, all right, this guy's shooting here, I'm gonna roll X amount of dice, all right, this many hit. That's like your entire play experience for that 3 hours because you have so many guys to move. Whereas like if you went to that same tournament, you went to that same event, you're always still playing on the chess clock and you're playing like, I don't know, like let's go to the other extreme, knights. I'm having a hell of a time. I'm chatting with my buddies. I'm like leaving to like go get a drink, you know. I'm going to see how my buddy at the other table is doing because like I have like 6 models on the table.
Yeah. One way or another, there's going to be an hour left to my clock at the end of this game.
Yeah. And it's not going to be on the horde player side. But if you change it to center the movement around the unit leader and doing the measurements from the unit leader, I think that's a way that is simplifying the game and still keeping it within the overall spirit of the game.
Yeah, for
and
sure.
It speeds it up.
It speeds the game up a ton, which like GW has been increasing rules complexity with every new release. And complexity is fine up to a point where it makes the game grind to a halt. And having played Legion, like, yeah, squad sizes tend to be smaller in Legion, but like, I don't know, droids go up to like, what, 10? Like, squads get, and you play quite a few. And it's just so much faster. Like, you move a unit, you're like, all right, it takes you like actually 10 seconds to move 10 guys, and that's long. Like, you can just literally scoot them up and just pop them down. Like, all right, there they are. Because the only guy that matters is the squad leader. Like, did he make it to the objective? Everyone else can stand wherever. Like, the squad leader, you're obligated to pull the squad leader last. And, like, yeah, it's excellent.
Other ones that come to mind, in AOS, if you have certain people as your general, you unlock different options as troop choices.
Yes.
So we kind of see this a little bit with like Dark Angels and like Raven Wing, and like you can make bikers and outriders troops in like this weird way. But I kind of want that to be just like a core rule. And I actually kind of want it focused around named characters. I think this would be like, named characters are kind of awkward. You don't want to often take them as your leader because it's like, turns out being able to customize the character is a lot better.
Yep. And then you still just get to take them, and they have all their other rules. I agree. Yeah, I was actually just about to say, but name characters are too good. You want to make them better, but no, yeah, that's so true. Because you never take them as your warlord. You just kind of like put them in your army, with the exception of the one or two who just like got to have good warlord traits because UW decided that they do, I guess. So like, what kind of name characters and what kind of troop choices are you thinking?
Oh man, now you're making me.
All right, I'll start then. The chapter master of the Raven Guard can unlock like jump pack troops as jump pack marines as troop choices.
Valoris lets you have wardens be troop choices.
Sure.
I know that kind of seems weird, but like wardens are kind of supposed to be bodyguard-ish.
Yeah. Diafood is saying in chat things like having Ravenwing biker troops being locked behind Samael. Yeah, because I think a lot of Ravenwing lists might not. Nah, Samael's look pretty good in Ravenwing, but the fact that you only get 2 HQ slots in Ravenwing detachments when you're like doing the all biker detachment, like you're probably just going to take a chaplain on a bike and like a second chaplain on a bike and call it a day.
Oh, I got one. I'm going to steal it from you, Ben. Farsight lets you get crisis suits.
I'm one of those like critical Tau players who's like not totally in love with crisis suits. Probably only because I've never played an edition where they're remotely playable.
What if they had OBSEC?
Good before when they could jump.
What if they had OBSEC? I don't know. They still don't do anything. It's like the same point cost as a Custode for a model that doesn't do anything. And then I can pay points for guns that are worse than Custode guns, and then watch it die because it doesn't have any vulnerable saves. I'm sad. You made me think about Tau. Why would you do this to me? More realistically, there's also like some elite characters that you never take as warlords, because like they're not particularly like the characters are fine, but they're not strong enough that you want to multiply them with a warlord trait. That could be interesting to take as a warlord to like boost things. So things like Zanger Shamans. Zanger Shamans is a fine model, but I'd never want to spend a warlord trait on one. But like, I don't know, what if I took a Zanger Shaman as my warlord and now Zanger Enlightened become troop choices? Like, all right, that's kind of interesting. Like, now I'm going to start thinking like, man, maybe I do want my Zanger +1 to cast his 1 power because, you know, Zanger Enlightened are sweet. They have heavy bolters. They move 14 inches. Now all of a sudden they're OBSEC. Well, now that's just like an interesting unit. Other thing,
cares your warlord. You get Vanguard Veteran as your troop choice. Yeah. Let's make it happen.
I like that.
Yeah, Iron Father Pharaohs could be, make all vehicles troops. Oh no, wait, hang on, stop.
You've gone too far.
Yeah, and also, yeah, not to get too into Dark Angels, which we kind of avoided covering, but that book is probably the strongest book in the current meta or ever. It lets you could do things like tone it down a little bit by being like, yeah, you have to take the slightly underwhelming named characters for Deathwing to make the Deathwing like full Deathwing detachment, like a detachment. Because as is, I don't think you're ever going to take Belial, who's like the named leader of the Deathwing because they can take any inner circle character. And you can make basically any character inner circle, and then on top of that, all of their main characters are inner circle, and some of their other named characters are insane, just like complete nonsense. Like they're named Librarian and they're named their actual chapter master are both inner circle and both have characters like completely off the walls. And it's like, why would you ever take Belial? Well, you're taking Belial because you want your troops to have OBSEC, or your Terminators to have OBSEC. There you go. Yeah, I like it. It's a cool mechanic in AOS too. I've certainly thought about it when I was more interested in playing AOS with you can take a burning chariot as a troop choice by taking a Zinch Herald on a burning chariot. And like burning chariots aren't great, but like it's sweet. It's just like cool. Like an army of like super fast flying chariots. Like that's just like a cool idea.
Other mechanics from other games. So in Monster Apocalypse.
Oh no!
Wait, what the fuck is Monster Apocalypse?
Oh, no, don't ask that question. Just accept it and move on. It's City Destroyer.
Did
simulator.
I just open like the like a huge can of worms here? Like figuring out what Kaiju Big Battle is for the first time.
It is Kaiju Big Battle. So Monster Apocalypse, for those who don't know, is a very different miniature game where you're playing on a grid with these huge. Yeah, it's like Kaijus and robots. If you've ever seen Pacific Rim, Monster Apocalypse came first. But like, man, there was some cross pollination there. It's giant robots and giant monsters killing each other by throwing each other through buildings.
Tactically.
It's wild. It's a wild game. It's very fast. Like it's pretty quick. Like games go fast. Your monster's got 8 hit points, and he hits the Empire State Building and loses half of them. But anyway, what's going on in Monster Apocalypse, Kevin?
So in Monster Apocalypse, 8 hit points is a little low. The average hit points like 10 to 11. And what happens is once your monster is at his lowest 5 health, he gets unique abilities. He in lore, like they're getting angry and they're going to their hyper form. This is a very kaiju thing to do. But the idea there is that this is a comeback mechanic. A lot of times I feel in 40K like you get behind and what's the comeback? It's like there isn't one. Like how do we represent or how do we introduce a mechanic into the game that like lets you come back when you're behind? You could flavor it like for different chapters or different things like Crimson Fist is of like if your opponent's outnumbering you or half your army is destroyed, you get X bonus. Like the chapter tactic just becomes you get +1 to hit rather than if you're shooting at something that's double your size. I don't know.
Yeah, that's hard to do. I mean, yeah, like you said, I think there's 2 different ways to do it. I just feel like here's the rule everyone gets at the end, or you could try and make it so every army has their own like comeback mechanic, but I think that'd be really hard to balance. Because like that there'd be people who'd be trying to artificially. I mean, literally, we would be the people, us right here, trying to artificially trigger our armies come from behind mechanic while we're like currently up by 20 points. Like, man, if I can like fly these 2 airplanes off the table, like, I have lots more units than him this turn.
What you're saying is like if you ever played like I think it was Final Fantasy it was Final Fantasy 8 where like your characters would gain access to like their like ultimate spells like if they were like on the cusp of death or like at very low health. So what would you do? You would just keep your most powerful dude at 1 HP like for the entire game because then you could just spam his ultimate spell.
Yeah. That being said, there's probably like more reasonable ways of doing it. Just like you could just like give players command points. Like you could like be like at the bottom of 3 player who's like if like someone's behind by like some number of I think it's just too hard to do though because there's a bunch of objectives that like score at the end of the game that like don't get counted during the game. So it's like, yeah, I picked Assassinate, which, by the way, scores at the end of the game. Like, I know we just like, I'll write it down when it happens, but it's like relevant now that it scores at the end of the game because of Dark Angel things. Yay. Like, I don't know, I took Assassinate and While We Stand We Fight, so like Kevin's beating me by 20 points when like really I've killed 3 of his characters and what's up, Kevin?
I just realized the Dark Angels thing you're talking about.
Yeah, we can talk about that in a second. Yeah, so anyways, like let's say we're playing a game, right? And I'm like playing against Kevin and I took Assassinate and While We Stand We Fight. Like, yeah, I've killed 4 of his characters and all 3 of my While We Stand things are like up. So I've scored 27 points, but they're not on the scoreboard yet. And like you definitely don't want that thing triggering for me. Because that's like that's a disaster. That's like I'm up and now I'm also getting to play like I think it's too hard is the problem. I love the idea. The idea is great. Like there's no comeback mechanic in 40K.
It's really hard to balance a comeback mechanic. Like if
you don't want to rubber band it.
If you guys ever played the fighting game Marvel vs. Capcom 3, there is a comeback mechanic in that called X Factor, where like it scales like depending on how many characters you had left on your team. So if you had all 3 characters left, you'd only get like 33% of like the benefit of X Factor, or if you had 2 characters dead, and you get 66% of the max power of X Factor. So like it was a comeback mechanic in that, if you're down to your last dude of your team of 3, you could really juice your last guy up to like mount a comeback. But what people often ended up using X Factor to do instead was, instead of using it to make a 1v3 or 1v2 comeback, it would be like a 3v3 or 3v2 game still. You'd land a hit, and then you'd use X Factor to basically confirm a character kill instead of using it as a comeback mechanic, because you got more value out of it that way.
Yeah. The other thing is that I think it's tricky to make it so that it's like always like counting the correct thing, like the correct metric for like who's ahead. Like for example, I recently played a game on TTS where I played Imperial Knights and Custodes. The list that Kevin and I discussed on the podcast, where we take a bunch of Shield Custodes. We did discuss that list on the podcast, right? Yeah, we take a bunch of Shield Custodes and a Knight Castellan. And by the way, that list is sick. And I beat my opponent by basically tabling him, and then I won by like 5 points, because like that my opponent's list was like pretty good at scoring points. And like if my opponent had some like huge comeback mechanic trigger because I was tabling him, like I would have lost. And I would have lost like pretty convincingly. And that's like, because that's like a decision we make when we're writing lists. Like sometimes you write a list and you're just like, this list leaf blowers my opponent off the table, and I'll figure out how to pick up the points over their smoking corpses. And like that's a strategy. You can do that in 9th edition. Like if your list is killing enough, you can just kill your opponent and then just kind of figure out where the points are going to come in later. And I don't know. I feel like I'm just crapping all over Kevin's idea, which is like wrong, because the idea is, I agree with him. Like 40K does need a comeback mechanic. I've played too many games where we get to like the bottom of 3, and it's just like, well, there's 2 more turns, but like it's done. There's no coming back from this. And there's no like real interesting.
Yeah, and
like
more often
interest
than not,
in like playing it out.
Just call it there, and then you re-rack or you call it a day.
Yeah, if you're playing on
but I think you.
Oh, go ahead.
I think you bring up a good point though, in that like 40K has 2, like it's not just the victory points. There's other metrics that you're like, how do you determine who's ahead, who's behind? Because you can't just like, it's not just army count. It's like so many things. Mom Pock is unique in that like you can kind of say power dice are your one resource, but let's be honest, the main resource is your monster's health, and so like
yeah,
it's like pretty accurate saying like once your monster's at half health, you're behind, or it's just a threshold. Well, I guess that's the other thing, right? You could say that it's not just a comeback mechanic, but like it's just kind of like baked in. Like let's just say like an army got to half strength and it got X bonus, and like that could happen for both players. It's not like I'm ahead of you. It's just like now you have to like be nervous about like overkilling in one turn because it could get you some bonus here or there.
Yeah. And the sisters army that I've been playing actually kind of does that. Like I play our Martyred Lady, and when my units die, I get miracle dice, and it's like I've played games where it's just like my opponent like we get to turn 3, my opponent's just like gonna kill my guys, and look at my miracle dice. I'm like, all right, well, I'm gonna make all my charges this turn, or I mean 2, because that's how many you can trick with miracle dice if you have the Triumph of St. Catherine in play. But like that's kind of crippling. Or like I hit you with 2 melta guns, and just take 12 damage. Like I'm just gonna use these just to make the 6s happen.
So I guess the idea is like introduce more, because those are like lose less mechanics. We often talk about like winning more, but losing less is an important mechanic that might need to be baked more into armies.
Yeah, that's fair. Like bonuses for like things dying. That's super fair.
Maybe that's where that discussion should go. I have a few more I really quickly want to hit. In AOS, certain characters have spells that are only on their character sheet.
Yes. We've started seeing that though, right? Not with spells, but with litanies specifically. There's like certain chapters that are just like, this dude knows. Blood Angels is a unique litany that like only one dude knows. And the Dark Angels have a litany that is usable once per game on the guy who's holding the relic with that litany in it.
You sounded very enthused about that.
I'm not.
But like, it's like definitely a direction they could go. They could like take a unit that's like kind of understat or has like a unique effect that just like it makes certain like not every sorcerer just be like, what's the difference between this sorcerer and this sorcerer? Well, this guy's in better armor. The end.
Yeah. It's one of the reasons I like Thousand Suns so much right now is like I always bring multiple attachments. And like, yeah, I bring multiple attachments because they actually get to know unique powers for being in their attachment. And it feels really cool. Like it feels like, yeah, like this guy is the dude who's like studied the way of blowing people up with his mind.
Yeah.
And
yeah,
this guy
I like that a
has
lot.
studied how to make people go insane. And it feels really unique. And it's one of the things that keeps bringing me back to that army is it's such a cool mechanic.
Yeah, that's a really good call out to make, was the different cults of the Thousand Suns, encouraging people to take different attachments, and then breaking that down into, all right, well, how can we encourage people to take different units? Because I can tell you like a bunch of times, like when I was putting together a chaos list, it was like, all right, do I want to take a sorcerer with a jump pack or a sorcerer in Terminator armor? There's no like functional difference aside from like, you know, like how they move about the board.
Yeah, one's faster, one's harder to kill.
Yeah, I mean, like, they both deep strike. One can fly, one can't. But they know the same exact spells. They can pull from the same disciplines. There's no uniqueness about them. The only difference is the armor that they're wearing. You know, and you could see a little bit of that starting to diverge when you're looking at the Loyalist Space Marines. Like the looking at the Primaris Chaplain on a bike versus a jump pack chaplain. There's an actual difference between them, you know. It's not as huge as the Cults of Magic, but you know, there's at least a reason for taking why you might want to decide a Primaris bike chaplain is better than, you know, a regular jump pack chaplain, even though they have like very similar mobility and stats.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. But basically what I'm saying is you want it to be an actual like choice. Because right now, when you're picking between a sorcerer of a jump pack or a sorcerer in Terminator armor, it's not really a choice. It's really like, all right, do I have like 5 more points to spare? Or do I really need to fly?
Yeah, I agree.
This would also kind of be where the leaders making certain things troops comes in, where like it would diversify like what kind of characters you see. I mean, there still probably would be a correct choice because it turns out in every game there's like a correct choice in the end of the day. But
it's a neat mechanic though. It's one of the things that I do like about AOS, where it's just like I don't just want like when I'm playing Thousand Suns, my Thousand Suns list is just like, all right, it's 3 sorcerers and Terminator armor because that's the best psyker in the army and it's not close. There's 2 other psyker choices, but kind of whatever. They don't have 2-up armor and Inferno Combi Bolters. So whatever. And then it's just because they're not, and also it's actually more egregious in Thousand Suns because this Terminators in Sorcerer armor can also get +1 to cast on their first power because they get familiars for whatever reason. I guess this is a bad example because that actually makes they do something different with psychic powers than all the other psychers. Yeah, it would be, whereas like AOS, like whenever I build an AOS list, it's like 1 Herald of Siege, 1 Chaos Sorcerer Lord, 1 of the Blue Scribes, 1 of the Curseling. It's like because they all just have like a unique power and just you kind of want to bring a little bit of everything, and it definitely encourages list diversity. And I think that anything that encourages list diversity is good.
Yeah, it's like it's
One
the
pick.
difference between taking a regular Poxbringer or taking Epidemius. Like you can take both, and you won't be worse off for it. Actually, you'll probably be better off for it.
Yeah, they bring different things to the table. Whereas with Psychers right now is just like, who's the best at surviving while standing wherever you need them to stand to cast their powers? Just take that over and over if you want more than a Psyker, which is really only a thing for Eldar and Chaos armies right now. And Eldar, they kind of fix it, right? Like Eldar, they're just literally like, all right, Warlocks cast off of one table, Fireseers cast off of another. I guess you're taking both, and that's that problem solved. But for things like, Thousand Suns and to a lesser extent other Chaos Space Marine chapters, I don't know there's that many Space Marine chapters that want to take multiple librarians, but yeah, it's just like it's what's the best version of them? Like it's one with the best armor save or the most wounds or something like that.
Right. And you could make the powers like very specific. Like this power gives the jump pack captain makes jump pack units. It spells like they move +4 inches, and that's like it seems very narrow, but you could make the spell very narrow. It doesn't have to be like a wide spell.
Yeah, it doesn't need to be like universally applicable. It could just be like exactly like that. Yeah, it's like a very narrow buff that you're not going to use very often. Like, hey, like he has it for free, and like that's worth thinking about.
Next up, so in Legion, the way they do their missions is very different. They have environment cards, they have table layout, and then they have the actual mission that you win with. And what happens is a player will bring 3 of each. They'll shuffle them up, deal them out, and then people go in turns vetoing 1 of each column. Or each player gets 2 vetoes, and they have to ban the leftmost card in each column. And after both person's vetoes are done, the leftmost card that remains in each of the 3 columns is the mission that you guys play on.
Can you back up one other step that's like really important? Both players bring a deck, and then the player who brought the cheapest army is the deck that you play out of. So you bid points out of your list. So like let's say we're playing 2,000 points, and I brought 1,950 and Kevin brought 1,960. Well, we're playing with my deck because I spent 10 points less than him. And people bring serious bids. Like people leave like almost an entire unit's worth out of their army sometimes because just like my army wants to play this mission, and if I get to play this mission, I can win down like half an intercessor squad, or like sometimes or like the equivalent of like an entire intercessor squad because you play with fewer units in Legion.
You know what? I actually really love that because it would. So it's like the opposite of. Well, it's kind of like an escalation league, where like escalation league is, people are encouraged to like slowly build up their force and bring like more and more units like every other week to their escalation league, which is great for getting people into the game. But what if you miss the boat on that escalation league and they're at 750 points and you just bought your first box of mans? Well, if you do it this way, you could still take part in that escalation league, but even though like you're at a numerical or points disadvantage, you still get to play alongside those people. And even if you don't have all of the units, you're not just giving yourself a handicap for no reason. You're just trying to stack the deck in your favor. It gives it a little bit more parity. And it also introduces a little bit more depth and kind of like gamesmanship into it.
Yeah.
Especially at the higher levels where like maybe like you can drop off like a squad of dudes and you bring in an army at like 1970 and but like what if that like you're like me and Ben are going to a tournament and I know that I'm probably facing Ben at the top table for first place, and I know like the most meta army for his faction is 2,000 points exactly. Well, I'll bring 1,999 points so I can play out of my deck.
Yeah. Actually, that's the other thing I wanted to say about this exact point is that I love building lists, and I love this idea. I've only really played Legion with my friends. I haven't gone to like a Legion event. But I love the idea. I love the sorts of things that people do with this at Legion events. and like the two sort of paradigms you end up seeing is you see people leaving huge chunks out of their list, like the 40k equivalent of like 200 points. And they're just like, my list is hyper specialized for like these 3 missions that I put in my deck, and we're playing with them because I didn't bring 200 points of models. And then they just do that. And there's like there's a bunch of lists that do that, and then there's a bunch of lists that are just like, I am here as a take all comers list because I've spent every point in my list, except for 2 in case I play against someone else who's done the same thing as me, and I'm just here to like crush my opponent under efficiency because I know they're being really greedy with their bid, and I'm just going to be like putting more things on the table than them, and then just beating them at their mission by having more stuff. And it just makes the meta really interesting. It gives you so many fascinating decisions with list building. Like when you go to list build, in 40k where I was just like, all right, like I got like 13 points to spend. What's the most efficient way to spend 13 points? Well, when you're in Legion, you're like, I got 13 points to spend. You're like, can I cut anything else? And that's like a really interesting decision point where all of a sudden you're like, well, maybe like in 40k, you just be like, yeah, sure, we'll give the Sergeant to Stormbolter because I had the points. And now it's like, can I afford to like cut a dude from this squad to like make my bid bigger so I can put my missions? And it makes anything that makes list building more interesting is like, I'm in for it. And I think that makes list really interesting.
Will GW ever go for it? Hey, we should encourage people taking less models.
Yeah. And even if it's not like a mission thing, like you could incorporate it. Like you could make it like that could be how you determine first turn. That could be interesting. Just be like, yeah, you're bidding for first turn. Like, and so like walking up to the table being like, man, how many points would you spend to like pick who goes first post deployment?
A lot.
Yeah, right. Like 50, 100, like 200. Like depending on my list, like if I'm like a guard artillery spam list, I'm cutting like 200 points because I just want to nail them with my artillery before they get to take a turn. But now I'm like, all right, if I'm like playing 200 points down, like I better be able to take at least 200 points off the table with my artillery, or like it wasn't worth it. Yeah, chat saying we'd never see another Custody Misericordia again. Yeah, probably not. That's how Custodes players fill out their lists. You'd never see him again. Yeah, I think it would be a very interesting change. It doesn't necessarily have to be like a guaranteed go first. It could be like a bonus or something like that. Making it a bonus is probably a little less interesting because once it becomes not guaranteed, I think players are less interested in like spending a bunch of points on them.
If it matters, I think first turn is maybe too powerful.
To me, yeah. First turn's probably too powerful. That's fair.
Well, it's actually
definitely something.
It's actually interesting because they had the same mechanic in X-Wing, and like it was determined to be too powerful. Like like there were some lists that were like ace lists that were like, I'm actually going to bring like only 1,700, like the 300 point bid wouldn't have been a joke for these lists. It's just like,
oh no.
imagine like the equivalent would kind of be like Knights in a way, where just like Knights, if they get to go first, will just alpha strike any threat they have to them. So it turns out not bringing 2 armigers to make sure you go first is like you just start winning.
Yeah, that's super fair.
But I don't know, like I don't know if it could be as simple as like I don't know, like a command point, like
veto a secondary. What if you had to like veto a secondary?
Ooh.
Like I brought my knight list. Oh no, I'm short 100 points. You can't take Titan Slayer against me because you used all your points.
I like that actually.
Yeah.
Okay, and
GW, take my idea. I'm already in love with it.
Last topic is a little bit less of actually the game itself, but more talking about like something that's kind of been baked in over time, and that's Magic the Gathering's like competitive format and non-competitive format. Like,
yes,
having those defined and what it means to actually be playing in a competitive game, and what it means to be like you're still playing. Your goal is not to cheat, but like having like a real understanding of like what kind of punishments are associated at like a RTT as opposed to a GT. Like those would be like the two scales I would have.
Yeah, so I was studying to become a judge, like a Magic judge, for a while. I never quite went through with it because the place I was going to be judging at ended up closing. Rest in peace, RSG. But like, if you like right now wanted to like look up, like, all right, if I'm playing a Magic the Gathering and my opponent accidentally looks the top card of their deck, because like, you know, they're trying to draw one card and they end up like picking up two and they go, crap, I saw two, and they put them back and they go, what do I do now? You can like Google it. Like there's a it's, you'll have to search for a bit, but there's a big old block of text of like, this is every reasonable thing that could go wrong in a game of Magic and how he suggests fixing it at various like rules enforcement levels.
Yeah, but Magic also has, you know, well thought out and tight rule systems and ideas like the priority stack, whereas GW alternates between using within and wholly within to the point where they needed to like actively define it and draw a fucking diagram to define what those mean.
Yeah, and rules enforcement level is what I mean. So Magic actually like draws a line. All right, there's Magic events of all sorts of shapes and sizes. You have your Friday Night Magic, which is like 16 people showed up to play Magic at a shop. And then you have your
10-year-old showing up who have like bought their deck that costs $10 off the wall, and
and they're like shuffling it together, and like they bought a deck from last year and it's not legal. Like, what do you do? Well, you don't want to tell the 10-year-old like they're disqualified because they bought something that's like too old, and like, but you're also playing for like a $10 prize, so it's not like they're trying to get something over on someone else for their 10-year-old. So, and at the same time, if like someone showed up to like a 300-person tournament being held in a convention hall, like with an illegal deck, well, you have to have a very different level of rules enforcement. And so they literally have like, all right, like here, casual games, not much is on the line. Like, and for the most part, those rules of fortunes are just like, was the person trying to cheat? No. All right. Like, put the game back together the best you can. Tell them to read the rules next time politely. And then we have like more conflict, like, and then we have like a high level of enforcement. So for Warhammer, this would be like, this is what you do at a GT, where when people mess up, you gotta do something about it, because if they mess up in a way that destroys the integrity of a game, so in Magic, there's things like miss triggers is a pretty common one. So like if I have a card that says like, whenever my opponent, I don't know, attacks me, they're supposed to lose a life, and like they attack me and I don't realize it, because there's so many things going on in the game. Like I don't realize they're supposed to lose life, so I miss it, and then I take the damage, and I go to my turn and like, oh wait, hang on, you were supposed to lose a life. Like, what do I do? Do I make them lose a life? Were they responsible for like noticing that they were supposed to lose a life? Like whose job was that? Like, and it's like, and there's like a whole list. It's like, all right, if I controlled the card, like it was my responsibility to be like, hey, you're losing a life. If it was something that like they had, they're responsible for it, and now like it gets more complicated because this is something that like hurts them, that's like on their thing, and they should be remembering it, and like, are they missing it on purpose? Now I just start thinking, like, is this something that like, and like, and the games like, and there's like a huge document of like, what do you do in these situations? And also like a very important thing that is sort of ingrained in you as a tournament Magic player is that you just call a judge for everything. Like if someone messes up, you just call a judge, even if the mess up is something like really minor and not something that like requires a judge's intervention. Like, so a perfect example, like if my opponent is, I have a dude who flies, and my opponent plays a card that says kill a guy who does not fly, and he points at my guy and says, I want to kill that thing with this, and I'm like, hey, you can't do that. And he goes, oops, puts it back in his hands. I should call a judge, because sure, it's probably just an honest mistake, and if it was, fine. But if this guy's been doing that every single game he plays against someone else, like, all right, well, he's trying to get away with it, right? Like he's hoping that I go, oh, okay, and then just like kill my guy without reading his card. same thing should be happening in 40K. Like if someone like makes a rules mistake, like you should call a judge. And the part that 40K is missing is that like we don't have an official rules enforcement thing where it's like I can't as like a judge like pull up like, oh yeah, this guy got DQ'd from an event for like this rules infraction, like the same rules infraction that like he definitely should know about because he got kicked out of an event for it. Like, yeah, he's like trying to get away with something versus like, okay, like it's a new book, you didn't read it, whatever.
Yeah. So
and the official term is like
at last
warnings.
year's Captain Con, what was that game that was being played in the main hall like the first day of the GT, where I remember like when they first started the day where they were like, hey, anytime if you have any sort of rules question whatsoever, just shoot that arm up, yell out for a judge. And then like throughout the day, you just hear somebody just yelling up, judge.
Yep. If you ever played a Magic event, that's the whole room. Like the whole room is just like people just like shouting judge over.
Yeah.
And for the most part, it's like someone did something, some minor infraction, because Magic is a heinously complicated game, a lot like Warhammer. And like people make small mistakes, and like 99% of the time, the judge just goes like, they just like write your name down. They're like rules warning for like trying to do whatever such a thing that wasn't actually legal. And then like it's usually an honest mistake, and then the player just never does it again because now they know the rule.
Yeah, I think part of that is also going to have to be bringing in from those other games, like that culture of calling for like a rules official or a judge, because at many events there's not that culture where the only rules official is the guy running the events. And even at GTs, like last year's Captain Con, because going back to that, I had a rules question, and I'm just looking around, I'm like, oh shit, where's John? And John, if you're listening, you did fantastic job, great event, like
yeah, Captain Con was excellent,
but again, but he's only one guy, and he has to eat lunch and go to the bathroom, and he deserves to talk with his friends while he's at the event too, and but again, like there's like, I don't know, like 16 games going on, there's only one of him, and there's me just like trying to like just looking around the room trying to find him, like, hey, I need a ruling, like we're on the clock, please come. But if that culture was already in place, then we'd already have like like maybe one or two guys volunteering and serving as those rules officials, instead of me just going like, hey Scotty, this is the way that it works, right? No, you're not sure either. Hey, where's John? Has anybody seen John? Has anybody seen the TO?
Yeah, well, I've 100% been in that situation where like I'm playing Tau, and like there's a rules argument involving Tau behind me, and like another player like taps me on the shoulder and like, hey, how does this Tau rule work? And I'm like, I know the answer, but like, man, it's probably not great that like another player is the arbiter here, which is part of the thing that, which is like, it's fine. Like if we all trust each other, particular case, the guy who asked me is a guy who knows me as a good Tau player, and was just like, yeah, like Ben will know.
Yeah, well, I mean, like it in a big event that could very easily be used to your advantage if you were like a nefarious person. So as an example, I had one guy playing me who had his things in reserve, and he had missed the FAQ where like you can't deep strike things on turn 1 in your own deployment zone anymore, and that was part of his plan, and he started doing that, and I was like, oh, you can't do that anymore. And he's like, no, I thought I could. It's my deployment zone, according to this ruling, I says I can. And I was like, hey, Scott, I turned over, I was like, hey Scotty, you can't do this, it was in this FAQ, right? And he's like, yeah, man. And I was like, cool. Like my opponent doesn't know that like if Scotty is like conspiring with me to fuck this guy over on this one particular play, he doesn't know if this guy even knows me, or if he's knowledgeable,
Yeah, we could be buddies. I might just say yes to any rules question you ask me.
Yeah, there's
at smaller events, it's not such a problem. It's more like your like huge GTs that are going 5 days, where you want to be able to track small rules infractions that aren't like destroying rules and game integrity. That's just like, and some GTs are doing this, but like
We're getting there. We've got the
we're getting there. We have like the card system,
cards and the red cards, but there's no
but the
overarching like.
But the problem is it's only when people call judges.
Yeah,
and it's also like, oh, I get 2 yellow cards at this event, 2 yellow cards at this event, 2 yellow cards at this event, but like, I never got tracked across all the events, so what does it matter? But this is also where like we don't want to make the rules like you feel bad for playing or you feel like you're going to get in trouble for playing. This is where like the different levels of competitive are. Like RTTs probably don't need this level of enforcement.
RTTs like you shouldn't have like as heavy a level of enforcement at RTTs. You should have just as heavy level of enforcement. You should have a significant less level of punishment for like rules infractions. If you're just like straight up cheating, like you should get kicked out. But like that doesn't actually happen that often. Like everyone like talks about it, but like, that's not actually like a thing that happens in 40K very often. Like most people know the rules well enough that like it's so hard to cheat in 40K unless you're like actually like using loaded dice. In which case,
Diafuda in the chat has a good point. With how players react to wanting to see opponent codexes, third parties are needed. Like arbiters are important. So I have a pretty good example of this. I was playing a casual game against somebody, and I charged one of his units because I wanted to use my charge distance to get my guys onto an objective. And in the rules for charging, at least for 8th edition, only the first model you moved had to end its move within 1 inch of the unit being charged. The rest of the guys could move however the fuck they wanted up to the charge distance you rolled. So I moved the first guy, and then I moved one of my other guys in the complete opposite direction to reach back to an objective. Still keeping within like coherence and everything. He's like, no, you can't do that. And I was like, actually, yes, I can. He's like, read me the rule. So I started reading the rule in the rule book, and I finished the point. It's like, I think it's like 2 paragraphs of the charge rule. I read like the first paragraph because it covered everything. And then he, in like a very stern tone, said, keep reading. And I was like, damn, dude, this is a 500-point game. You really want to go like this? Okay, I'll keep fucking reading. Anyway, I haven't played that guy since because he's a dick. But if that's your reaction to like a rules query that you had and you want me to read it to you, like that's when like a third party calling for that judge. That's when it's important. Because then that judge is going to come over, read the rule to you, and yeah, you can do that, man. And, if the guy wants to be a, sourpuss about it, he can direct that energy towards the judge and not the person that he's spending the next, 2.5 hours across from,
It's funny talking about wanting to read other people's codexes, because let's be honest, like, sometimes, like, if I was cut off from the internet and all of a sudden I walked into my local game store and someone put a Mortarian against me, I would not believe half the rules that were on that data sheet right now. It just
it's so many. It's like I don't get to reroll anything worth of text that he also has 4 warlord traits that aren't on the data sheet. They're on this section of the book. Like just hand me your book, please. Like I need to like digest the literal 5 paragraphs of rules that are on this model.
Right. So like, but the problem is like a lot of people take that me saying like, "Can I see it?" as like I'm not trusting you, and like, I mean, there's a non-zero percentage of that, but like, I used to write escalation league rules documents, and like, I used to have to write out like an entire paragraph describing like, hey, some people learn in different ways. Some people are vocal learners. Some people need to read to understand it. So when someone is asking to read your book, it probably is because they need to read your book to understand what your model's doing. It's not an insult to you.
Yeah, put yourself in their shoes. How many times have you gone up against like an army that you're not familiar with, and your opponent has like very plainly stated like everything that this unit does in plain English? They're not using. They're saying like, oh, it has a, if I will feel no pain, it does this, that, blah, blah, blah. And then like 2 turns later, they're doing a thing and you're like, oh shit, it could do that? Happens all the time.
Yeah. And it's also like people like get their codexes wrong. Like I'd like to think I know all codexes. We just got the FAQ that nerdlings don't get feel no pains against. I didn't know that. Dude, I don't know a lot
3
of
years I've been playing that war wrong.
Lots of people like because people in this area, I guess a lot of people weren't surprised by it because most areas apparently play that correctly, but people in New England, like just like weren't playing that super correctly. I've had people take feeling pains against me. I've taken feeling pains against other people, and if someone was like, "Hey, can I read Nurglings?" and they're like, "Yeah, dude, you don't get that." Like, yeah, like that would like sometimes people say rule like I and they're just wrong. I've done it. I'm sure I've had opponents who have done it, and it's like it's not malicious. It's just like 40k is complicated, and like the difference between only takes feel no pains against 1 damage weapons and doesn't take feel no pains against 2+ damage weapons is like almost the same thing, but then there's like this corner case that I got totally wrong. Oops. And so like when when someone asks me like, "Hey, can I read your book?" I'm like, "Yeah, here you go." Because you know what, sometimes you get things wrong. Like I've learned more than one rule about my own army by someone being like, "Hey, like that thing you just said, like it's not true. Here, read this." And I'm like, "Oh crap!" Like, yeah, it's not. And you know, so like just like you just gotta normalize like people wanting to read your rules, and it's awkward. It's a little more awkward for 40k because it's like I have this book, it is mine. I have spent dollars for it, and Games Workshop, for obvious reasons, doesn't want to just like have all the rules in one place. Compared to like Magic, where it's just like if my opponent plays this card, I can just be like, "Just the card do," and then read it, and just like all the text is there, and there's no like rules outside of the card. It's just like there it is.
God help you if you're a Chaos player.
Yeah.
Well, it's funny because even right there's like a completely different mindset where it's just like, this is your property, you played it, but I want to read your property. Grab it, look it, read it.
Yeah, you usually ask. You're just like, grab their card. You're just like, "Can I read that?" And there's no world in which it's acceptable for them to say no. Like it just isn't.
Yeah, like you like
if they say no, you.
It's like
so if they say no, you call
to
a
like
judge,
say like no, you can't read my book.
Judge will read.
But on the other hand, like you know, we're all gamers here. You might have like Cheeto dust on your hands.
Yeah, it's super fair. Like and you know, if my opponent is eating Cheetos, I am going to say no, and then the judge can come over and read to them. Because you can ask the judge, because like technically speaking, they can say no, and then you call the judge and you go, "Can I have the exact text on insert card name?" And the judge will have to read it to you. The judge might not be super happy with your opponent for eating Cheetos and forcing them to read all of the cards now, but like there's no way for them to like deny you that information. And in 40k, there's not supposed to be either, but people get touchy about it. And yeah, like you can say yes and get huffy about it, and like we're emotional creatures. It is uncomfortable when this person who I need to be interacting with for 2 more hours is grumpy because I asked to read their first warlord trait they read to me because it was 2 paragraphs long and described the conditions under which they get to reroll charges.
Yep. So while we're on the subject of Cheetos, and this might be a good ending point because we've been going for like 90 minutes now. If you must eat Cheetos while you're playing, use chopsticks. It'll keep your fingers clean.
Thank you. Before we do head out, chat's been very lively today. Thank you guys for that.
Yeah, thanks, chat. You've been great.
But before you leave, ring the bell, smash the like button.
Thanks.
You are obligated.
Yeah, so we diverged a little bit into just talking about like rules culture and everything, but I mean like we were talking about like things that we want to see imported into 40k from other games. And I think aside from like any like specific like rules or game systems or anything, I think that kind of culture shift would be the best thing that could happen to the game. Because let's be honest, some of the like the more like wild stuff that we were talking about earlier in the game ain't happening. With GW being what it is, it's like it'll be like 12th edition before it happens. They'll probably reboot 40k and call it like Age of like Marnius Calgar or some shit.
Yeah, but as far as like like rules enforcement stuff goes, say what you will about the game, the Magic rules enforcement is like the gold standard in my opinion of like what your game's rules like enforcement structure should look like. They is completely codified, and there's an organized of like certified individuals who like they test them in. Like you have to take a test to be like someone who can like enforce Magic rules at official events. and we like 40K should be looking at in the direction of like having an official like judge or referee program, like whatever they want to call it.
Yeah. And it's easy for Magic because Wizards has given it such great support. And while GW is getting there, it's not there yet. And other organizations such as the ITC, they've put out guidelines. They're getting there too. But the ITC in itself, like Reese has said that he doesn't want the ITC to be a governing body. I don't blame him. That's a lot of work.
That's fair.
And that's totally fair. Yeah. Is there a monetary incentive to being a governing body? Sure, there could be, but it's never going to be as good as like actual company itself. And the ship is turning in the right direction. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, that is definitely one of the advantages that Magic has, that the same company that produces the products and writes the rules also says who can and can't hold tournaments, and then gets to set the conditions for how they hold the tournaments, who's allowed to enter the tournaments, and who's allowed to run the events. And it's just it's a wildly different event than GW, who's like, here's some rules, and then whoever wants to pick them up and just like make an event, like go for it.
Chat has a good point. In that it needs to start with GW, and it needs to start with getting rid of the, hey, do you have a rules dispute? Roll a d6.
That's the worst thing I've ever seen in a book, and it's completely wild to me that like there was ever a point where it was just like, let's argue about rules and roll a d6.
On a 4-up, I win, and on a 3 under, you lose. That's basically.
I've had opponents do that to me, and like they're like, all right, we're disagreeing. Let's just roll d6. And I'm like, the exact argument was the discussing resilient works against mortal wounds to reduce damage you're taking from smite, and you know what? It doesn't. And they're like, oh, let's just roll d6. Like, we're not rolling because you're wrong. And like my army whose damage output is in mortal wounds is like not losing this game on a 1 to 3 because you don't understand the rules. And it's really tough to me that like it's just been so ingrained in the culture that like, yeah, you just roll a d6, and they need to stop printing that. I think they have, but my goodness, it hasn't been that long since they last printed it.
It's at the very least ingrained enough where we all know it and are talking about it.
Yeah, at least now there are FAQs, and like the FAQs are pretty good. It's definitely a holdover from when there weren't FAQs.
Yeah.
Yeah, like when they were before they had defined within and wholly within. What does it actually mean?
It's also like GW sees their game as a lot casual than I think some of us see it as. Like, we want to play it at like a top end competitive, and GW is like, no, like people play this game casually. And they do. And it's fine to have rules for people who play casually, but you also like competitive scenes drive games. Like, that's just like a truth. Like, competitive 40K is a large part of why GW's stock is completely through the roof right now. And they have started to really like take notice of that. Like, they've hired competitive players to play test. They've started really putting things together to make like their competitive rules packet like is basically the same thing as their casual rules packet to funnel people between casual and competitive much more easily, which we've talked about before. And I think it's time to get the rules enforcement in place. We could talk about this forever. We should probably wrap it up somewhere.
We should probably stop because like I want to like go to bed.
Oh yeah, okay, super fair. All right, well, you heard it here first. Chris is a party pooper.
I am a party pooper. I go to bed at like 9:30.
Poopers.
But yeah, I mean, I think this has been a great discussion, and I think out of all the things to import from other communities and other games, it's rules enforcement and the culture of asking for a judge to make rulings so that everything can be equitable and fair
and recorded. All right.
So yeah. With that, thank you everybody for listening to this week's show. Rob the Red, thank you for the 6-month sub. I'd like to thank our contributors for this episode, Kevin Lieb and Benjamin Rubenstein. This has been the 3D6 Charge podcast. Bye for now. It's been about 5 minutes since Kevin said it again, but Kevin, can you sign us off again?
Ring the bell, smash the like button.
Don't roll any ones. All right, thanks, guys.
Bye, guys.